Hello, everybody. Andy Goldberg here. Welcome back to the Founders Chair podcast. Very delighted to have on the show today Dr. Mick O'Connor from the company Haelo. Mick, welcome to the Founders Chair.
Thanks very much. Delighted to be here.
Well, I'm very delighted and excited to hear your story. Would love to just start off by hearing about a little bit about you personally. Where you're from, what you get up to when you're not at work, that sort of thing, just so we know the person.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Glasgow, in Scotland. I grew up just outside Glasgow in a place called Greenock, and I now live in Cambuslang, that's not also not too far from Glasgow. So very much been in and around Glasgow my whole life. I'm married to the gorgeous Denise, and I've got three sons, Michael, Kevin, and Ewan. My hobby is a bit sad. My hobby is learning. When people used to ask me if I had a hobby, and I thought, well, I don't play golf and I don't play football and I don't do martial arts. But what is it I do? And I like to learn, and I'm very much a practical learner. So I think the learning thing makes me sound a bit geekish. However, my real area of passion and my area of fascination is how to make sense of complex organizational systems.
Okay. Well, that I don't think
I
that's
don't think that's
bad at all. Maybe more people should take a leaf from your book.
Yeah, absolutely.
So tell us the story about how the business came about. And I'm particularly interested in at what point did you feel you had the confidence to go out and do it on your own?
Yeah, I think from a very young age, I was always quite creative and inventive. So when I was younger, I thought I'd be an inventor, and then I think later on I thought, well, could I start my own business? And I think, like probably most people, I fell into the trap of, what is it I'm going to build a business on? What am I going to design? And I'll probably come back to that a bit later on. But in terms of Halo, the business came about following quite a serious incident. So I used to be the general manager of the UK MOD live missile test ranges across the UK, where if you get things wrong, then really, really bad stuff can happen. So I think having the business in control and having controls in place were really important. So things were going pretty well until one day it didn't go well at all, and with a whistleblower on one of my sites. So despite all of the systems and all the controls and all the management intelligence we had in place, there was bad stuff going on underneath our noses and my nose, that we couldn't see, we couldn't touch, and we couldn't smell, but it was there nonetheless. So that was the origin of Haelo. So it didn't have a name at that point in time, but effectively that was the origin story. And that resulted in 7 weeks of torture where the group compliance director and his team descended upon me and my team. And for 7 weeks, 7 days a week, morning, noon, and night, we tried to dig under this thing to understand, how much truth was in the accusations that the individual was making. And many of the accusations, we couldn't find any evidence to support it, but some of them were very, very close to the mark. And when I stood back from it, what I realised was that as much as there were 6 sites in the UK and a site in Canada that I was responsible for, that I couldn't be everywhere at once. So I had to rely on my team and I had to rely on management intelligence. But it became evident the management intelligence wasn't telling the whole story. However, what I've learned is that management intelligence will never tell the whole story. And I think sometimes we almost lull ourselves into a false sense of security. So I took a big step back at that point in time and I thought, right, what happened and why was it allowed to happen? And as part of the investigation, we found that it might well be that I didn't know what was happening in Canada or let's say somewhere in England, but there was good people in my organisation who were competent, trustworthy, and much closer to the situation than me, but they didn't have a voice. And I thought, how can we liberate that understanding and that local situational awareness? And how can we then bring that in and give us a much richer understanding of the ground truth and give us a much richer understanding of management intelligence? So I had managed many businesses. The largest business I managed had 1,000 people in it. but 120 million P&L. So running a business didn't daunt me.
Yeah.
However, I wasn't quite sure, well, could I start a business on my own? And I definitely went in with some degree of skepticism. I thought, I don't know if I could. I know I can manage big businesses, but can I do this? So I was quite confident I knew how to run a business. So in 2016, I took the plunge. However, what I would say is, despite all the corporate training I've had in management, and I've been privileged that I've had lots and lots of it, it did not prepare me to be an entrepreneur. I knew how to do a P&L, I knew all that stuff, I knew how to do sales, etc. But genuinely going through the entrepreneurial journey, it really didn't prepare me. So I feel as if I've been on another apprenticeship in terms of training to be an entrepreneur. I
Yeah.
think if you can combine that with your corporate experience, then that's quite powerful. I feel that many, particularly young entrepreneurs who haven't run big businesses, start on their entrepreneurial journey. They've probably got some fantastic solutions. But then they get to a point where the business gets to a size and starts to scale that, well, if you're the CEO, you can't be as close to the coalface. You need to be the guy that's out there raising and doing all that kind of boring governance stuff,
Yeah.
because that's your role as a CEO. And I think sometimes, I wouldn't say all, but many young entrepreneurs struggle with that. And some of them then exit as a consequence of that. And I feel that to some degree, I'm growing into myself. I'm not quite there yet, but when Haelo scales, and it will, when Haelo starts to scale, I'm very comfortable with that. I know how to run big businesses. I know how to govern them. I know the challenges. So as I said, I'm very comfortable, but we're not quite at that point yet.
I mean, but you kind of experience the inverse challenge of the skills required to start up a business and be on your own at the beginning are different
Absolutely,
than the skills it takes when you've got 1,000 people and they're doing the work. You've got to do all the
absolutely,
decisions yourself and
absolutely,
come up with all the ideas yourself at the start. So it's a good thing for you. Learning is a hobby because you probably, I mean, I'm assuming you embraced that challenge of solo
absolutely.
entrepreneurship.
Absolutely, and again, I would say I've had some tough gigs in my career. This, hands down, is the toughest thing I've ever done in my life, certainly professionally. I think if anybody is considering being an entrepreneur, if you're afraid of hard work, then it is not for you. It's a bit fraught at the start. There's a lot of, I would say, self-doubt. There's imposter syndrome. For me, I wouldn't refer to myself as an entrepreneur initially, because I felt I had to earn my spurs. However, when you get through that and you get over it, this is by far, as much as the hardest thing I've ever done, it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done, because you get to choose what you get involved in and who you get involved with. And you don't get that choice when you work for a company or work for a big organization. So I feel, to some degree, if you're familiar with Maslow, I feel I'm almost at the apex where I'm self-actualizing, because the things that fascinate me personally, the things that I read about, is what I've built a business around. So every day, I'm genuinely, it sounds a bit cliched, I'm exhilarated every single day when I get up, in terms of what I'm just about to do that day.
Yeah, because you're not you're at the apex, so you're not just doing what you need to do to survive. You're not fulfilling basic needs. You're filling your
Absolutely.
fundamental need to grow and make a difference and achieve your greatest potential. And so
Absolutely.
so you couldn't do that when you were in the corporate world?
No, not at all, because I think that you spend, I know that the types of role I had, sometimes, you're 5 days a week at best, more likely 6 or 7 days a week. So it can consume you. And beyond that, you really need to make time for your own physical well-being and mental well-being. You need to look after your loved ones and your family. So that just consumed me. And the nature of me, certainly back then, I was quite a workaholic. I'm not particularly proud of it, but I was
Hmm.
very much consumed by it. So I really didn't have time for anything else at that point in time. But as I said, I think now, and I think even my opinion and my relationship with money has changed, and I would say in a good way, is that I feel like I'm a very wealthy individual. I'm certainly not the richest person in the world when it comes to what's in the bank. But I think I measure wealth in that almost that rounded view that I've got enough to keep the lights on and feed my family and pay the mortgage. But I'm much more flexible. I'm doing things that I love every day. But I can be there for my family as well. I mean, I think sometimes the challenge I have is sometimes I forget that you can take holidays. But my wife always reminds me and keeps me right. But as I said,
Somebody will
it's
always
a
be there to
tough thing.
remind you. Yeah.
Absolutely. As I said, it was a tough thing to do, but as I said, it was one of the, one of the best decisions I've made with the benefit of hindsight. Very, very rewarding.
Tell us a little bit about Haelo. What do you do? Who do you do it for? And who are you?
Yeah, so Haelo, it started as a consultancy company, and that was the intent. So back in 2016, started as a consultancy company based on that incident. I built a consulting framework called organizational meshing, and that was built on five principles. It was based on clarity, focus, rigor, coherence, and mastery. And I would then get organizations deal with their, let's say, their senior team, their C-suite, et cetera, and take them through a process to get that absolute clarity and just allow the business to then prosper. I did that for one particular company, and after 9 months, they said, "Look, we love it," and they gave me some fantastic testimonials. And then they says, "Are you now going to go and develop software?" Now, my immediate answer was no, because I'm not a software guy. I'm an operations guy. I've worked in the oil industry, I've worked in shipbuilding, I've worked in defence, I've worked in aviation and manufacturing and space. So I'm an engineer through and through. So I thought, well, I don't develop software, but the company was quite insistent. And I spoke to their operations director and I says, look, there's some interest here in developing software. And he says, yeah, if you could develop a piece of software that supported the framework, we'd bite your arm off. So I thought that's a buying signal. So I took time out. I took 3 months out, sat in a darkened room, and I thought, well, how do you develop software? Where do you even start? So as an engineer and a systems thinker, I thought, let's define the problem I'm solving. So I thought deeply about that and I thought, right, let's intimately understand the problem these guys have got and then look at what are the types of things that they need to have in place to help manage that particular problem. But I got to the limit of my incompetence pretty quickly because I wasn't a developer. So I went and found some people who could code, and they effectively codified what I then developed. 3 months later, we took it back to the company and they bought it. That was then the birth of my software career. But classically, as an entrepreneur, the right way around is find the problem and understand the problem and then develop a solution to that problem based on the needs of the user. In this case, I developed a solution. And then, although I felt I'd been gifted effectively a piece of software, it's then saying, well, who else can I sell this into? And that took me into the wilderness for a wee while. But then back in 2020, I came across a thing called RegTech, that's regulatory technology. And the light bulb came on, and I realized that's my tribe. That is my home. I've got a RegTech business. I just didn't know I had. Because every business needs to demonstrate, particularly, I mean, pretty much every business is regulated in some shape or form. There are some that's quite heavily regulated. So you need to be able to demonstrate that you're regulatory compliant. And you can do that using a big system like SAP. You can use the back of a fag packet. You can use Excel. It doesn't matter what you use, but you need to use something. And I thought if I can develop a really smart solution here at the right price point, then potentially I can build a business and scale a business. That's really where the start was. So in terms of your question, what does Haelo do? So we're developing what we're calling a smart compliance engine. And what that does, it accelerate regulatory decision advantage. So how do we get to a point where we can create decision-worthy information, where a decision maker can take that information and make a decision purely based on that? So I'm describing that as decision advantage. And through a configurable digital twin that I'm building, it gives a holistic overview across a whole enterprise, and it creates it within what I'm calling a single information environment. So what we're doing is we're building the future of regulatory intelligence for financial services. That's our beachhead market. So the intention is that we start in financial services. I'm developing a piece of software that's entirely agnostic. We'll grow within financial services, but when the time is right, we'll then pivot into other regulated verticals. And that could be pharmaceuticals, it can be nuclear, it can be healthcare, it can be space, it can be rail, it could be aviation. It doesn't matter. What it's saying is we're going to develop a solution where it can solve effectively, or at least it can apply to all those use cases. So our flagship product at the moment, what we're developing, is a regulated horizon scanning solution called Regenesis. And that's a smart compliance engine, as I said earlier. And what's it's designed to do is to transform how firms manage relentless regulatory change. And as a statistic, according to Thomson Reuters, regulation has increased by 500% across the last decade, which means there's a regulatory update somewhere in the world every 7 minutes. And that's the challenge. So at its core, Regenesis is an AI-powered regulated horizon scanning solution. And we're currently beta testing it. So we've got a number of organisations within financial services who are taking it through its paces at the moment. We're doing that complementary. Then we move to, I would say, low cost entry. And then by the end of this year, the intention is to then take that product to market. And so far, so good. Now, there are other competitors out there. We believe that there's some good competitors out there, but the feedback from the market is that a lot of people are in this game, but there isn't an ideal solution at the moment. So what I'm looking to do with Regenesis is to build this into almost a best-in-breed solution, but it's a competitive environment. The
Hmm.
other product I've got is called IO, and IO means intelligence overlay. And what that is, that's the basis of the configurable digital twin. So that gives you oversight across a whole enterprise. The intention is to build that out and then integrate it with Regenesis. Once we build that, we've then got a product that's unique. I've talked to HSBC, I've talked to Virgin Money, I've talked to For Credit Europe, I've talked to Fujitsu. And what they're saying is, if I can bring this to market the way I'm describing it, it will be unique in the market. So some of those big players are giving me some good pressure to say, we want you to accelerate the development of IO. My plan was to launch it early to mid 2027, and they said would like it sooner. So that's then took me on the journey of raising. I didn't want to raise at this point because what I wanted to do was to get the first product out.
Yeah.
So I've brought some people into the organisation that are fantastic people. They're working around me where I can focus on getting the product ready to launch at the end of the year. But in parallel, we can also look to start to raise. And I've had some interest recently from VCs, unsolicited interest. The most recent one was last night, where a company reached out from New York who are in the process of supporting a large GRC organisation. But what they're looking to do is to mop up some small organisations to effectively increase their offering in terms of their portfolio, and they feel that Haelo could be a good fit. And also last week as well, I was approached by a company, and they do something very similar to Haelo, but in the legal sector. So it's almost like legal tech. And they've been asked by some of their existing clients if they do regulated horizon scanning, and currently they don't. And they thought, well, we don't want to go and develop our own, so we could either go and buy a business that does it, or we could invest in a business that does it. So we've had some conversation of them potentially taking a stake in Haelo. So they're already in the trade, so they understand the pain points, they understand the challenges, but they understand the market. So in terms of the CEO, he and I got on very well, so there's some chemistry there, and the two businesses are complementary. The prize at the end of this for Haelo is if it works and we can strike a good deal and we've got a good term sheet, it immediately gives Haelo access to 1,300 customers. So that organisation, because they would then have a stake in the business, it's in their vested interest to almost help upsell the product, either to the companies that already have almost shared an interest that they're looking for some sort of horizon scanning solution, or potentially introduce it to others who haven't. So immediately it just gets market access, which would be very lucrative if it came off. But as I said, we're only in the red kind of early stages of that. So I mean, in complex, highly regulated sectors like financial services, the companies and the firms are they're overwhelmed by the pace and the scale of regulatory change. So a lot of the data is fragmented, a lot of manual processes, silo systems, legacy tools, and it almost makes it impossible to maintain compliance without significant manual effort. And my interest in complex organizational systems is that most people would agree that organizations by their nature are complex. There's lots of actors and lots of moving parts. It's very dynamic. And most people would describe it as complex. But what do we mean by complex? So to me, something that's complex is inherently uncertain and unpredictable. Therefore, it's uncontrollable. And what we try to do is try in vain to control something by its nature is uncontrollable. So what I'm looking to do is to develop something that is much more adaptive. So it gives you almost that real-time insight where you can identify unusual activity, anomalous patterns, you can make sense of it. And in theory, I'm saying, could we get to a point where we can detect unusual activity and respond to it in 0 seconds? Now, in reality, we're never going to get to that point. But I thought, how close could we get to that? Because one of the things that I hear the term actionable insight an awful lot. And when I ask people, what do you mean by actionable insight? They normally point me to a graph or histogram. And I say, that's not actionable insight. It's not. You tell me it is, but it's not. Because a graph that's trending down, assuming that the data is accurate, is just telling you it's trending down at that level over that
Mm-hmm.
time. What it doesn't tell you is why it's trending down, the implications of it trending down, and what you can do to make it trend back up. That to me is true actionable insight, because what it means, you can then take that data and make a decision solely based on it. So, really, what we're looking to do is how do we get to a point where we can create contextual information that's so rich that a decision maker can make decisions based on the data without having to speak to another human being. Now, that means we need to have trust in the data, we need to have lineage, we need to have provenance, we need to all of these things. But at the moment, when I ran businesses, I would get presented something, but I would then have to ask somebody to say, well, why is that trending down? And what is it a big consequence? The data itself didn't tell me that story. So I thought the richer we can make the data, the quicker we can make better decisions. So what Haelo does is create that holistic single information environment that will then integrate horizon scanning, regulatory obligations, and control frameworks, risks, organizational taxonomies into one intelligent adaptive platform. And I think unlike other static systems that are out there, the combined Regenesis and IO platform continuously ingest data. And whether that's from humans, if it's from existing data sets, if it's from satellites, if it's from sensors, it doesn't matter. Data is data. It's how you can ingest that data and make sense of the data. So at the moment, in terms of the Regenesis product that's in test at the moment, once we've launched that, I'm focused entirely on the UK market and financial services. I'm focused on mid-tiers to SMEs. So that's the beachhead, if you like, and I've got a good understanding. It's not a massive market, but it's a starting point. It's enough to say sustain Haelo. Over the next couple of years, we'll then get up the food chain, and then we'll move into tier one organisations. And a number of tier one organisations have expressed an interest, but to actually, as a small business, selling it at tier one will take somewhere between 18 months and 2 years. And I thought I'd be starved of oxygen before then. So in terms of the Regenesis product, the REC Horizon scanning product, we can already access 52 jurisdictions, 500 publishers, and a corpus of 1.5 million documents. And we can do that today. So when we launch that product, as much as I'm focused on the UK from a sales and BD effort, if somebody from Australia, the US, or anywhere else said, look, we've heard of this Regenesis product, can we buy it from you? The simple answer is yes. So that'll be done more on an opportunity basis. And then through time, I might decide strategically, let's set up in Australia, or say, well, let's look at the EU market because the regulations in the UK and the EU are very similar. Okay, we've got some language, but very much English is a second language to most of those nations. So strategically, we'll decide where the right place is to go. But at the moment, I'm not losing any sleep over that. The focus is entirely on UK, mid-tier, SMEs, REC Horizon scanning UK. And the challenge is to almost carve out a niche within that market and
Yeah.
then push off from there.
So you've got a good, clear plan for growth, a good, clear marketing plan for the next few years. Um,
Absolutely.
so when you so just tell us a little bit as we start to wrap up. When you took the plunge and you went from running large companies to being out on your own, there was a learning curve there.
Yep.
What would you say was your biggest learning as an entrepreneur, and what advice would you give to young entrepreneurs who are just? I know you've already hit a couple of those points, but what would be your biggest learning and your final piece of advice to people who are considering going out on their own?
Yeah, I think there's probably at least three bits of advice. But I think before I get into those three, I think the first thing, as I said, it's a tough thing to do. It's hard work. It's very enjoyable. If you're not careful, it can consume you, and it'll chew you up and it'll spit you out. So you need to take time for yourself and for your family. You need to look after your physical health, your mental wealth, your mental health. You need to look after your relationships. You absolutely, that's a fuel that will keep you going. If you don't, there's a danger you'll burn out. So it's important to get that balance between work and play. In terms of the advice I'd give, and I think now when I go in and help businesses, and it's so obvious, but at the time when I started my business, it wasn't so obvious. So the first bit of advice I'd give is thoroughly understand the problem you're solving. Again, don't come up with solutions. Find the problem and really understand the problem intimately. So if you've got an idea for a business, understand who's got that problem and go and talk to them. Don't get office premises. Don't start spending money on developers. Don't do anything. Go out and start to test the market and understand, is that a problem and is that an unmet need? So the first piece of advice is thoroughly and intimately understand the problem you're just about to solve. The second thing is know who you're solving it for. So know the market. And I mean, so sometimes people come up and say, well, I've got this thing and we can serve any market and we've got no
Everybody needs it.
competitors. Yeah, absolutely. And that usually is nonsense. So really what you want to do is almost get a niche within a niche within a niche and absolutely get laser focused on this is a problem, this is who I'm solving it for, then know how big that is. So it might well be that, yeah, there is a real problem. I know who I'm solving it for, but the market itself's worth £2,000. Well, it's hardly worth it. But if you then can find a big market, you say, okay, I can solve this problem. I know how to solve it. I know who's got the problem. Then that is liquid gold. And I know in terms of my, let's say, technology roadmap, I know where I'm starting. So mid tier to SMEs, da 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 da. Then at some point in time, we then pivot into other regulated verticals. Now that market by 2030 is worth 110 billion. So that's the market I'm ultimately after. But I thought we'll start small because I think that one of the things you can obviously tell with the accent, I'm a Scot, I'm a proud Scot, and an engineer. We're a nation of innovators and inventors, but we've got a bad habit of hiding our light under a bushel. And I just thought, I'm not playing that game. So one of the things I did some time ago is I thought, can I get this business to be a unicorn? And start to think right now we're going to be a unicorn. So how would we approach that? And even in terms of our back office processes, we're looking at automating everything right now so that if and when the business scales, operationally we're ready to scale. So as I said, I think it's not just a case of thinking big. I think if you say, well, I know the problem, I know who's got it, I know how big it is, and I know I can solve this problem, get very, very clear down, real double down on that, and that's what will see you through. And as I said, when I decided, right, we're going to be a unicorn, we're going to have £1 billion pound valuation, whether we do or we don't is irrelevant. The fact is that I'm focused on that, just completely switched my outlook.
That is good advice. Good advice, and probably a good point place to finish up, Mick. But it's really fascinating what you've come up with, and just the scale of the problem that you want to solve. Forget the solution that you've come up with, but like you say, like you really understand the problem that you're looking to solve, and and it's not a simple one. Some people, when they want to go into business for themselves, they just open up a coffee shop, Mick. You could have just started a cafe.
I could have. One of the things I'd leave you with is that I think that normally as a startup, you're described as an SME. So there's a lad called Bill Ollett, who's a professor at MIT, and I had the privilege of spending 5 days with Bill. Um, and he's got a book called Disciplined Entrepreneur. And if you've got about 30 quid to go and buy a book, I recommend buy that book. So he's got his 24 steps. And what it does, it differentiates an SME from an IDE. So SMEs, it can be a florist, it can be a coffee shop, it can be a taxi company. And that's great. And you're serving a local need. And we need people who do that. We need those businesses. An IDE is an innovation driven enterprise where you're solving a big, important problem that's got global reach and you can scale it globally. That comes at a cost because there's big risks associated with doing that kind of enterprise, but there's big rewards as well. So the nature of me, again, maybe it's the engineer in me. I thought I want to solve something that's difficult. So you'd normally describe it as a wicked problem. So this is definitely a wicked problem, but what I'm looking for Haelo to come up with is a wicked solution.
I love it. Just absolutely brilliant listening to you talk about, something I wasn't very familiar with. All I know is that whenever I speak to business owners and I ask them what the number one challenge is, very often they're saying regulatory compliance. It's consuming, it's stressful,
Absolutely.
expensive, and all that kind of stuff. So it sounds like you've got a wicked solution, and a what do you call it? Best in breed
Best in breed.
app for that. So really want to thank you for coming on to the Founders Chair today, Mick.
You're very welcome.
Absolute joy.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it. Also want to say thank you very much to all of our listeners for tuning in and watching and listening. Keep an eye out for other Founders Chair interviews coming up soon, but just want to say thanks once again to Dr. Mick O'Connor from the company Haelo. Mick, thanks again.
Thank you.